Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started. Everybody is here, and we are now live and streaming on YouTube. So, oh no, and I have the video on in my own background. That was a horrifying echo. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the PocketGamer.biz roundtable session. This week we'll be talking about preparing to pitch, and we have a panel of experts with us who will help discuss pitching and the current market and what you should do and what investors are looking for and all this kind of wonderful stuff. If everybody who is now joining in could please unmute yourselves, reveal yourselves for the world to see. We have a fine group of people all joining us today. I do not know how to work Zoom anymore. It's very warm in this room. So my name is Rick Carelli. I'm the editor of PocketGamer.biz, and I'll be moderating this discussion. And I will now introduce, or allow everybody else to introduce themselves. I will start with Sophia.
Hi, I'm Sophia Aubrey-Drake. I know a number of people will know me, but to those of you that don't, I run the Big Indie Pitch right here at Steel Media, Pocket Gamer, which is our indie pitching competition, where indie developers bring their games along to meet some judges, expert judges, three of which we've got here today, get feedback on their games, hopefully win a prize or two, get some editorial coverage. But yeah, just an opportunity to pitch a game and showcase it to the world.
Yeah, if there's one person who knows just anything about pitches and what makes a good one, it's probably Sophia, because I'm sure you've seen thousands of them at this point.
I have. Well, thank you, Rick.
Next, let's go to Becca.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Becca. I'm the CBO of Landfall, which is a pretty small indie developer from Sweden, but we were the developer behind stuff like Stick Fight, Cluster Truck, Tab G, which was supposed to be a April Fool's joke. And now we're working on Taps currently and have a bunch of other projects in the loop as well. But we also started funding a while back because we're lucky enough, to be stable financially. And now we're just trying to give back to the indie community. And before I joined Landfall, I was head of Berlin Baltic Nordic, which is an initiative that is funded by the European Union. And I was basically connecting the games industry from Berlin with the Baltic Sea, Nordic countries, and pretty much everywhere else, and building up a network of publishers, investors, service providers, and connecting them with each other.
Cool, thank you. Jupiter, you can go next.
Hello, my name's Jupiter. I do a lot of stuff in the indie sphere. I judge a lot of things. I do a lot of game jam coverage. My official titles are I'm the games wizard at Armor Games, which means I'm the licensing manager. It's just a fun title. And I run a couple of review websites. So I go to pitches and I hear a lot of pitches, like the Big Indie Pitch, for example, basically to find games that I think are interesting enough to be covered, and also look for games for Armor Games.
Excellent. And Stephen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen from Deca Games, also based in Berlin, Germany. We are what we like to call a live ops publisher, which means essentially that we help developers to basically take care, operate, or acquire their older games, the ones that have been out in the market for some time, but perhaps are not able to be fully supported anymore because resources are limited and people need to focus. So prior to that, I was head of publishing at Six Waves, which is back in the day, one of the largest publishers of free-to-play games in the social gaming space on Facebook, and they're also one of the top publishers in Asia, in particular in Japan. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Thank you very much. So we'll get down to questions, and we will be talking about, as I said at the top of the discussion, talk about pitching, and that's kind of the main sort of aim here. But first of all, just a nice little taster setter question, very big one that you can all sort of jump in on. How competitive would you say the indie scene is right now at this moment?
Very.
Yeah.
I knew someone would immediately say very. Thank you, Jupiter, for fulfilling that prophecy. Does anyone have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been competitive, but now since everyone is like kind of stuck at home, a lot of indies have a lot more time to focus on developing their game. And I think that's a very strong, how do you say that in English? I mean, that's a very strong case for how competitive the indie scene is right now, because it's just so much time to work on whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's competitive in two different ways, I think, and some of those can be positives and some of those can be negatives. I think on the one hand, as platform holders, whether that be the App Store, Google Play, Steam, or even as far as the PlayStation Store and Switch, have embraced self-publishing more and more over the years. We've seen more and more indie developers enter the scene, which is amazing, and that's great. But it's encouraged more and more people to step out from the studios and make their own game, which has upped the number of developers making games independently, and that's amazing. But on the other hand, what that's done is seen a massive swarm of games onto different platforms, which has obviously in some cases made visibility lower, which has upped the competitiveness again, because obviously now you're competing with so many different people. At one time you were competing with fewer, but the opportunities to be seen were far less, and now we've got where, you know, there's loads of people competing, but there's also loads of people trying to be seen at the same time. So it's a competitive in a different way, but obviously it's a much more positive position we're in because it's been democratized much more.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I think one note that I'll add to that is the larger industry players, if you look at sort of the market intelligence, they're coming out with less launches every year, bigger budget titles, longer development windows. So that opens it up for more indies to release more games, but by nature of that, you know, it's much more competitive. They're competing against each other now. So, you know, there's definitely opportunities, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's something we've especially seen on Switch recently, is the way that, especially with Nintendo's launches being, you know, spaced out considerably at times, and obviously third parties, like you say, doing much the same, because whereas, you know, especially with the current situation we have in the world, that's obviously seen progress slow in some major studios, but seen progress speed up at indies in a lot of cases. You're right, you know, they're relying more and more on indies to fill a lot of gaps, which is great.
Cool. So yeah, it's a very competitive market.
Yeah.
It's kind of an obvious question, really, but always good to start with something easy. And so to sort of move on to our main kind of topic of pitching. For a lot of indies, you know, you're working as a small team, and there's only a handful of you to do a lot of tasks and build a whole game and market it and everything like that. Pitching a game, events to publishers, to investors, you could see that sort of as being like valuable time spent on something where they should be spending more time just working on the game and that kind of thing. So why is it so important to spend this time and get a good pitch and pitch your game to investors and events and this kind of thing?
I mean, obviously there's a ton of reasons, you know, from gaining exposure to, you know, gaining publishing, if that's what you're looking for, or investment, or anything else like that, and connections. And obviously I'm sure we'll delve into all of those, but I think from top to bottom, like one of actually the most fundamental aspects from an indie developer, when you sort of ignore all the external aspects and just look at the person who's sitting there, or the team that's sitting there developing the game, it actually can help you understand your game far better, not just from the feedback element, but when you're required to drum down something into key essential parts, it allows you to focus on what it is that's essential and unique and interesting about your game, and sort of hone in on these elements and really give greater focus and understanding to your, you know, your development cycle, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one thing. But obviously, you know, beyond that, that also feeds in from a feedback relation as well. You know, when you're pitching, I think a lot of people get a bit too beat up about whether the feedback's going to be positive or negative, but ultimately positive and negative feedback is all positive. I know that sounds bizarre, but the point is it's all useful. You know, and it's all going to help you in your development in various different ways. So I mean, I'm sure the rest of the panel have a lot of different opinions as well.
Yeah, I think like, you know, there's a very kind of romantic image of an indie just focusing on making games, and certainly that's fine, and people should feel free to do that. But I think it's just a good skill set to have if you care about sort of the health and long-term longevity of your studio. You have to be able to talk to publishers, investors, what have you, unless you think you're perfectly fine to survive with, you know, the level that you're at. So I think everyone, whether or not they're an indie or not should kind of develop this habit of being able to pitch and generate interest. Whether or not you need a deal or not, it doesn't hurt to get other people excited about your game.
It also doesn't take that long to sit down and work on a pitch deck and then pitch a game. It might seem like a daunting task. You might not know where to start, but there's enough resources out there that indies can find, and they can set up a pitch quite easily, because it's just talking about your game at the end of the day, isn't it? And that's something that you should be able to do if you're making a game. You should be able to talk about it. So when you go out and do it, if you're at events, because a lot of pitching does happen at events, it's taking more advantage of the event, which is something that you should be doing if you're taking the time to go anyway. You should be getting the most out of that event.
Yeah, exactly. I think it all depends on what you're looking for. I mean, I've had it like so many times that I was offering, when I was still at Brawl and Baltic Nordic, offering showcasing for free at a conference, and we would cover that, but just not the travel costs. And still so many indies would just refuse to do that because they think, yeah, they have to focus on actually developing their game, which makes sense. But at some point, if you don't know what to do, what you're going to do afterwards in terms of the business plan, like, do you have your marketing and distribution figured out? And if you don't have that, then it's always good to go to a conference and then start pitching and get to know what's out there and how you should be prepared for the long run.
Yeah, and the one thing I always think as well is, ultimately, if you don't have a big team of people working on marketing and PR and all those sorts of other elements, and you're doing it yourself, ultimately, even if you're not planning on doing any of that, even if you're, you know, the complete anti, you know, I'm not going to conferences or anything like that, ultimately, you're still going to pitch your game, because that's, if you're doing your marketing yourself on Twitter or sending that email to the journalists, you might not think you are, but ultimately you're still pitching your game, and all those skills you've learned from doing it before all feed into that later cycle bit when you're trying to get editorial coverage, or you're just trying to get people to pay attention to your game on store listings or social media.
If you end up
I think
pitching,
it all helps. No, sorry.
I was just gonna say, if you end up pitching to publishers and pitching to investors, you'll end up being able to spend more time on your game if you get the investors and the publishers that you do need, so that you can then focus. And if you're not into marketing, if you just want to be a developer who just works in your game, you're gonna need to find these people that can do the roles that need to be filled.
Yep.
Yeah, that actually feeds into my next question quite handily, which is, do you actually think that developers need a publisher or an investor in this current market, or is there still room for going on completely on your own? Like, what do people think? Jupiter, you seem quite keen on people working with publishers.
I just feel like if you're gonna do it on your own, you need to wear a lot of hats, and a lot of people aren't good at wearing a lot of hats, and it becomes a problem. So some developers don't know how to market, and they don't know how to like cut together a good trailer. And these are things that you do need. They're not things that you can, in this market, go out without. And there are the few games that pop up here and there that are like, this is one person and they did zero marketing and they had this breakthrough success. But that's not everyone. A lot of it is doing these other roles. A lot of it is the additional support that a publisher can give to you. And lots of people need investors because they need money, which is a pretty basic thing that you do need as a developer. So if you think that you can juggle that many hats, but a lot of people can't.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on, do you have the money to even focus on your game and you know, finishing it to get it to a state where, you know, someone really wants to play it. And for that, sometimes you just need a publisher or an investor to make that even happen. But I think it also depends on, is it your first game? Because there's a lot of indies, they're just working on their first title and they have no idea about the business part of it, which is perfectly fine. And then you need someone to advise you desperately. And then, you know, either you go to conferences and you find those contacts yourself, or you work with a publisher or an investor and they kind of make that happen and support you with that. I don't, you know, it depends. I don't necessarily think that you need a publisher. You can do it yourself, but you need the context and you need the expertise and experience in that field to do it yourself. And then it's still going to be a lot of work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, go on, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many developers that I've met over the years that have kind of presented a game with the budget, but, you know, only factoring in the budget for the actual game development and nothing beyond that, right? And you know, sometimes you can get lucky, as some of you guys just mentioned, but that's really, really rare. And almost certainly the exception. I mean, most of the time you need to think about distribution, about scale. And even if you have a lot of cash on hand to do that, do you have the expertise to do that? It's a full-time undertaking. Publishers are able to help you not only with that expertise, but also to absorb the risk by funding that user acquisition or that marketing, doing all the stuff that you haven't thought of as an indie studio. So, and even if you decide not to work with a publisher, it never hurts to talk to publishers anyway, just to get their thoughts and about how to position the game in the market. What would their strategy be? And then ultimately you can decide what's best for your studio. But I think the good thing about these days in our industry is that publishing itself is becoming much more specialized, and it really depends on what the needs of your studio are. It can be, someone to fund the development, someone to actually just do UA, that kind of thing. So you really have to see what are the immediate needs for this project and for your studio, and then chances are you can probably find a player in the industry that can address those needs.
Yeah, I think there's obviously tremendous value in publishing studios taking your game and working with you to publish your game. I think that's not massively a controversial opinion, and it's literally I would reiterate what all of the other panelists have said. I suppose there are always exceptions, just like there will always be exceptions. We see every now and again at the pitch student developers coming along, or people creating art house projects that aren't there to make necessarily a financial gain from it. They're there just to maybe as a portfolio piece when going out and getting work. These are unique situations where you may not be concerned ultimately in the financial side of it, and that's totally fine. But as Stephen says, getting opinions from publishers is never ever going to harm. Any feedback is always good and always useful for you. And I think the other thing is to add to what Becca was saying. It's having that, unless you and Jupiter and everyone really, I think it's having everything is hard for one person to have. So even if it's not a publishing house, but it might be a consultancy firm or a specialist marketing firm or something like that, having that help. There's nothing wrong with saying my specialization is in this area, or I know how to do these areas, but I might need a bit of help in this area. I mean, the amount of indies who come along and say, well, I built the nuts and bolts, but I had someone help me with sound because it's a very unique specialization, so, again, I think don't try to do too much yourself unless you have to, or you desperately want to. It's just, there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to get a sound person in, I want to get someone to help with the graphics or the marketing, or I want a publishing house to help me take it to the next level.
Yeah, cool. But having said that, I think it's also, sometimes indies are a bit clueless, and I don't mean that offensive, but it's like, come on, you think like, okay, I'm in India, I made this game, and now necessarily what I need to do, because everyone does it, is find a publisher. And then sometimes, I see indies getting pressured into a deal because they think this is like the best thing that ever happened to me, that someone wants to sign my game. And I don't think that's necessarily always the best option. As I said, it depends on what you're looking for. But I think if you're an indie and you have the right contacts, you can do it yourself. You don't need to have a publisher, and that sounds wrong, but you don't need to have a publisher necessarily taking all the credit for a game that you developed and sharing a lot of your revenue if you could do it yourself. I think there's like, sometimes you should just motivate indies to maybe find another game or look into other options instead of just, finding the easy solution, and the one that's just next to me is like, oh, okay, guess I need a publisher. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And then, that's partly why I say things like PR firms, consultancy firms, because they can offer help in various different ways. But, it's interesting. I was, I won't say with who for obvious reasons, but I was only having that conversation with an indie developer earlier in the week. And I was saying, like, if you've got interest from publishers, that means you've got something. Yeah, so, definitely, go round the different publishing houses, get some opinion, see which one works for you, if any of them do. That's not to say you can dawdle and act like, you're royalty. It's nothing like that. It's just, have a, you shouldn't rush into something, just like you shouldn't do it with anything.
Yeah. And one of the things that everyone sort of mentioned is, getting feedback from publishers and that kind of thing. And you know, obviously, a big thing is getting in the market and making a game that it's going to sell is standing out. Do anybody in the panel have any tips to help developers like stand out in the market and make a publisher or someone look at their game and go, "Oh, yeah, I need to work with these guys"?
I mean, the thing I start every single pitch by saying is, be unique. And that sounds very vague. I get that. People are going to want a little bit more information as to what I mean by that. But it's work out what your game offers that no one else does. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to create a brand new genre. You know, for example, you know, we had the range of battle royale games came out. Now we've got a range of different hyper casual titles, and that's great. And you can say I'm taking popular mechanics, but what are you doing extra? Because especially if you're going into a competitive market, it's not good enough to just do what the market leader's doing, because, well, they're the market leader. You need to try and find something to help differentiate you from the rest of the crowd.
You shouldn't spend all your time comparing yourself to games that are already successful. You should focus on what you do better or what you do most unique than the games that you're trying to compare yourself to.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it always helps, you know, to have very early on to build a community and have a social media presence. And I can only speak for Landfall, but for us, it's sometimes, you know, that we're finding games on Twitter or Reddit or somewhere, you know, we think like this game looks dope. And then we're just reaching out to the developer ourselves, you know, and just start talking further, because they have a presence already there, and that helps.
I couldn't have put it more eloquently than what you guys just did. What is your USP, your unique selling point? Let us know, and that's the best way to get our attention.
Yeah, I mean, and the USP is going to help you in so many different ways. It's not going to help. It's not just going to help you stand out from the crowd, which obviously helps you on store listings, which helps you on social media with consumers, with all of that. But it's also going to help you tighten and focus your development and help you refine what you're doing into a sort of cohesive, tight, controlled experience.
Cool. And so, you know, we've gone on about, sorry, we've spoken about the USP and that being a very key thing. And, you know, from what I've heard from publishers and investors and stuff like that, something that they're usually looking for is looking at the team and track records and that kind of thing, because they want to work with a team and not necessarily just the game. But do you have any advice for like first-time developers who are going out and pitching to publishers and investors who might not necessarily have this notable background and track record of things? Stephen, you seem to be nodding your head, so I'm going to turn to you for this one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the things that stand out whenever I'm meeting a developer, a first-time developer, usually it's how well they understand the market, for one. You know, whether or not the idea that they're trying to pitch me is viable, or if they're just, you know, completely, you know, not understanding the way things work. The other thing I would say is probably passion. So does this developer have a really clear vision of what they're trying to create? And you know, are they communicating that effectively? Those are two things for first-time developers that can help to win publishers over, is to, you know, really convince them that I have a very, very clear vision. I care a lot about this project, and I'm going to make you believe it, so that, you know, we can hopefully do some business together.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, passion was one of the main things I was going to add on top of the obvious. I think another thing that people don't necessarily always think of, and it's sometimes hard when you get constructive criticism rather than positivity, but I suppose one thing I always look for is the receptiveness to feedback and flexibility. That's not just to say that you'll roll over and do whatever anyone wants to do, because obviously you have a vision and it's your project, but, you know, being open to feedback and open to saying, oh, maybe that bit isn't quite working the way I thought it would. So now I want, you know, let's take different feedback, from whether it be from experts, whether it be from, you know, the market, from a soft launch, for example, be able to, you know, be willing and able to adapt to the market needs and demands as development goes, I would say is something you should be willing to do, especially after a pitch. If you plan on, you know, pitching your game and then taking it to another pitch and another pitch, which you more than likely would be.
Yeah, I think it's kind of important to know the publisher or investor that you want to reach out to in terms of their portfolio, because if you're just reaching out to just anyone, the publisher will know. You know, it's just, okay, this is not for me. This is just for, I'm trying to find just someone to publish my game or just sign me to make this happen. And that just, it helps if you have a clear picture and you know why you're reaching out to that person specifically. Yeah, and I think right now it's an easy thing to participate in online conferences and formats because you don't have to spend a lot of money on traveling, because that's, just be honest, that's insanely expensive for an indie developer. And now there's just so much happening, which is not really expensive at all. And if it's things, you know, like the indie pitch or PC pitch and so many other things. So I think that's a first good step in just reaching out to publishers, and even if it's just for the first contact, or, you know, getting to know other indies that are working in the same field and just exchanging experience and see how they did it, because this industry is so happy to share.
Yeah.
Cool. We've got a comment in the chat. If anybody in the attendees, if you want to talk in the chat, please feel free. Send in questions for the panel. We'll be asking them later, but just wanted to raise this one from Jason, who says the USP is secondary. What is your opportunity is the primary factor. I think this sort of lends into what Becca was saying. Each publisher, investor, etc., sees each opportunity differently based on who they are as a business, or the platform, genre, market scale, whatever. And if you don't understand the business of the person sitting across from you, you're banging on about USPs will get you nowhere. Which sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think on that point, I suppose that depends. I mean, it's kind of the same point. It just depends on whose mindset you're looking from. I mean, if you're looking from a publishing company mindset, then that would be the overriding opinion. But if you're looking at it from an indie point of view, I suppose, to me, the USP probably is still the number one, if not joint number one. The difference is you shouldn't be doing a shotgun approach to pitching. It's not necessarily going to work. You should be targeting people who resonate with you. I mean, we say that all the time on the editorial side of things, in that, sending your message out to just random journalists or just to everyone is not really going to help you with your coverage. You need to work out which of the journalists are receptive to your type of experience. Or are you looking for news? Are you looking for reviews? Are you looking for feature? And so, if you are, rather than the pitching competitions, which is a little bit different, if you are looking at meetings with publishers, you probably shouldn't be just trying to get a meeting with every single publisher. You should be working out what your game is, which a pitch will help inform that, to sit that information, and then going out to those specific publishers a lot of the time.
You also want a publisher, an investor that cares more about or resonates more with your game or your studio, because then they'll be better for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Okay, I think we've got a good idea of the market and what people should be looking for. Now let's get to the actual, the meat and potatoes of this whole discussion, pitching. So, nice general opener for this. What is the key to a perfect elevator pitch? If I was coming to you with my new game and you had 5 minutes to tell you, what do I need to tell you in that elevator pitch style? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy. You just it needs to be very clear to who you're talking to, what type of game this is. And it's kind of shocking to say this, but a lot of times when you're sitting down with a developer, especially during the big indie pitch where the format is so short and condensed that they're kind of nervous and they're hoping to unload all this information in a short amount of time. It's surprising how many developers don't make that, the basics very clear from the get-go. So, for example, what type of game is it? Is it a free-to-play game? Is it a premium game? What platform are you developing for? Is it mobile, PC, console? I'd say, we just did a big indie pitch last week. More than half of the developers that pitched did not make this clear from the get-go. And so the whole time they're talking, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, what kind of game is this? They haven't made it clear yet. And I'm just a little bit distracted. And so I think it really helps to be able to communicate, what is the executive summary, the literally, if you're in an elevator, by the time you get out of the elevator, will you be able to communicate that clearly to your target? That's something that you cannot just do willy-nilly. You have to rehearse it And I think the secret to a really, really strong pitch is just practicing until it's very clear to everyone. There's a lot we can dive into in the details, but I think clarity is number one. I mean, if you're not counting passion, which we spoke about earlier, but just being clear with the publisher what it is, so that they understand it. Like, for example, if you're talking about, what type of game, make it super easy to understand. It's a battle royale game in space, or it's a card battle game for women, or it's, I don't know, educational shooter. Something like that.
Educational shooter.
I don't know. Those are just ideas off the top of my head, but that will already help to steer your audience into a specific frame of reference where they can say, oh, okay, all right, here's where they're going. Let's see what they have to say about this, and that will kind of lead to sort of better results, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, because I always use that as in one of my examples, which I even used last week in the pitch, in the briefing room, is that, references and comparisons really help. You don't want to overload it with that, because obviously the focus should always be on your game, but especially in a digital format where it's actually quite difficult to, like, normally I say, if you have a build with you, a bespoke build, and hand over that build, let people play it if possible. Now, that advice stands true in the normal times, but right now we're not in normal times, and so it's a little bit more difficult. So those comparisons and references can just help a lot more. So anything that's like X meets Y is kind of a good idea. So like the one I always say is just, it sounds stupid, but it gives you an idea, is if you had like Fast and Furious meets Jaws. Well, now you've got an idea of some wacky, heist-based shark game or some, but you've got an idea. And then there's something to go from there. I mean, I think one of the other things I would say as well is, whilst obviously publishers, investors, anyone else wants to know that you can fulfill the project and believe in you, I personally always think it's best to focus on the game first, because all those other things can come after, if they're interested in the game. But ultimately the genesis of your collaboration, or whether that's with a journalist or your audience or with a publishing house, is going to be the game itself. So I always say focus on the game. And everyone says, well, like, let's take the pitch, 4 minutes isn't long enough, or it's very short. But I think ultimately you need to be able to, in any which way you can, get down your key points of your game, the essential points, down to about much less than that, actually, about 2-3 minutes at absolute most. Because especially if you attend shows, a lot of the pitches you do showcasing your game, and a lot of the important meetings we always talk about in the industry are the impromptu ones, when you're at a party, or when you're just walking around the show floor, or you're sitting in the lunch area. So you need to be able to do that, because you never know when the opportunity might arise. I mean, just look at Twitter, it only allows so many characters, and it's the same sort of premise, really.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Jupiter, do you want to go?
You can go.
Yeah, no, I think I really agree. It's about the key facts. I was like, first, I want to know what kind of game is it? And obviously, if you do something like the big indie pitch, then you have a very limited time, and you have to get it all done. If you're, somewhere at a conference, then you might be able to talk for a bit longer. But when it comes to a situation like this, then I first want to know what kind of game is that. Then I want to see a tiny bit of the game if possible. And then I also want some room for questions that I might have. And I think it's important to be passionate about your game, but also be kind of rational at the same time. Because if you're just too passionate, we just had that at the big indie pitch last week. Yeah. It's just like, wow, an explosion of passion. And it was really fun to watch, but I still had no idea what was going on at the end. So that makes it kind of complicated to understand.
I'm going to go back and just slightly disagree with Sophia about the comparing your game to 2 other games. It's X meets Y. I think that sometimes that can be a very negative experience if the person you're pitching to doesn't like X and Y that you've picked, or they focus on an aspect. When we were at the pitch last week, the person that was judging with me, a person came in and said, my game is this and this. And we got halfway through the pitch, and I hadn't heard of the first game. And I said, okay, how do you attack? And the other judge answered for the developer, going, oh, if it's like this, you attack like this. And that developer went, no, actually, it's a completely unique like attacking point. That's not at all like that game. I meant that it's just a mobile game like that game and is an action game like that game. So you do need to also explain like how it is like X and Y and what's different from X and Y, if you are going to make that sort of comparison, because people will assume the aspects that they like or the aspects that they dislike are the aspects in your game when they might not be.
Yeah, totally. I just think it's more having reference points can a lot of the time help. I mean, a lot of the time when we think of games, you know, AAAs or something, we think of brands, we think of identities. And if you're coming at this as a first-time developer, I think even if you have a completely, totally unique sort of title, it helps not only give reference points, but I think it also helps understanding of market as well. Because I think one of the things I was going to say is that, like, it's all good and well to talk about what you value in a game, but what's fundamental is talking about what the audience and the market will value, like why this will appeal to the market. You know, a lot of the time we hear, well, you know, I like this, I like that, I like the other, and that, as you just explained with in the specific pitch, that might not resonate with specific individual people, but ultimately everyone has individual tastes and experiences. So if you can explain why it will resonate with the market, that kind of mitigates personal preferences to an extent when it comes to business. Not obviously, it doesn't invalidate individual preferences.
Right. One thing I'll add on top of what you guys just mentioned, which I thought was all super helpful. You know, even if you're preparing to pitch at the big indie pitch, where it's a 4 minutes and really brief, I would recommend to every developer out there to have everything ready regardless. So, you know, there's been a lot of times where I was not able to have a meeting with a developer, but I happened to judge them during the big indie pitch and was so interested that I was like, hey, let's find some time later today. Let's look through what you have, right? And especially if you're looking for investment or funding of some kind, you need to have your financials in order, your business models all set, and you know, things that you can sort of defend and talk about intelligently to potential partners. So don't just necessarily think in that context of the big indie pitch, although that is an unbelievable tool for visibility for all developers. But you should always have everything ready just in case, because you know, you never know what may happen. These organic things that occur at events, you know, chance favors the prepared mind, as they say, right? So if you don't have your elevator pitch, get your elevator pitch ready. If you do have your elevator pitch ready and you don't have the other stuff ready, get all that stuff ready as well. Because it's only going to help you, you know, when you talk to other people.
Yeah, and one last thing I was going to say is, I suppose, and it's not necessarily as relevant to the pitch, but it is relevant to your spot meetings or anything like that, is, you know, always have visuals or video sort of on you, I would say. You know, they say, you know, like a picture paints 1,000 words. And I think it kind of is true in this regard. You know, you can tell someone, but ultimately they'll make their own image. But if you've actually got something you can physically show to people and say, oh, look, here's like a 1 minute bit of gameplay footage, I think that's very, very powerful to sort of always have on you. Just like, you know, you might have, I don't know, an umbrella or something like that.
Yeah. On top of that, I mean, I would say preferably have a playable build on you. If you don't have that, have the trailer. If you have the trailer, have it saved locally to your device, so you're not relying on the Wi-Fi of the conference. If that doesn't run, have screenshots of the game just handy in an easy to search kind of way. And that way you have all your bases covered, right? Just in case, you know, one thing doesn't work, you have backups, and screenshots will work just fine for most publishers.
And on top of that as well, make sure your device is actually charged, because I've been in a few pitches where I finally got my hands on the game, and then 2 seconds in, it just died. And I was like, oh, I can't play, and sorry, I'm going to have to mark you down for that one. We've spoken a lot about things that people should be doing. Are there any other sort of common mistakes that you've seen developers do when pitching, and things that they really shouldn't be doing that you've seen a lot happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all that we already said, or the others already said right now. It's just be prepared and know who you're talking to. And especially if you're scheduling a meeting at a conference or an online conference, wherever, and you schedule it because you're asking for something, then it would be nice if you know who you're talking to and who that company is. Because I've had it a bunch of times, you know, that I'm just sitting at a meeting and that person's like, so I'm looking for money. What exactly do you do? I'm like, you know, there's a way to be better prepared. And then if you're asking for something, know what you're asking for. And I've had that also way too many times that people just, it was probably, you know, the first attempt to find a publisher or an investor for that matter. But just if you're getting asked for your ticket size and you have no idea, then you should probably, you know, take a bit more time and think about that and then start talking to a potential partner.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I see every now and again when I'm, you know, observing or being pitched to actually, which is quite surprising, and it can come in both sort of, well, I wouldn't say positive, but, you know, it can come in a very negative way and a sort of more sympathetic way, is I find, you know, sometimes there can be a lot of self-negativity. I find some of the people I meet can be very, beat themselves up quite quickly, and so they'll come in like straight off the bat super apologetic, and I notice it because it's something I can be guilty of too. And it's like, you know, come in and go, oh well, you know, the graphics aren't very good because it's an alpha build, and you know, and this doesn't work and that doesn't work, and I'm going to change that because I know that's not very good. And the thing is, actually, all of those faults can just be encompassed in the one sentence of, it's an alpha build. I mean, we all know what an alpha build is. That's fine. That's completely understandable. So whilst it's good at times to point out things that you're definitely going to fix, you know, it's like, oh, well, we haven't got round to doing that. The graphics are going to be changed. This is placeholder. You don't have to be overtly, you know, negative or beat yourself up about it too much. And also, and I think this just comes down to preparedness, but sometimes when I see teams, one person will say something and then the other person will kind of argue with what they've said, and then they'll have like a mini debate between themselves before they've agreed on it. And it, you know, I think it's
so awkward.
Yeah, it's actually not so much the fact that, you know, the confidence side and not knowing. It's just, yeah, kind of awkward when you're sitting there going, okay, you know. So I think that comes down to preparedness, but I think also everyone in the industry, no one's there to really beat indies up. You know, everyone, even if they haven't done it themselves, respects that it's difficult and there's challenges. And so, yeah, just saying it's an alpha build and we're working on this is fine. You know, sometimes it can be a little too self-deprecating.
I think the only thing that hasn't been mentioned that I would say is that when you're doing pitches, there's question time. And sometimes if it's your first pitch, you might be given a question that you weren't prepared for and you don't know the answer to. And it's important to pretend that you definitely have thought about this before and it's definitely something that just hasn't been ironed out, and have a good response that isn't, ooh, I haven't ever thought of that, or I haven't ever looked at that. It's just like a good default response that's like, I'll actually get back to you. That's something we're looking at. Just something like that you can say, because often when people have a question that's asked to them and they don't have a very good response, or they just sit there and look at their game and are like, yeah, maybe, or maybe this or whatever, and start having a conversation around that instead of answering, that's remembered. And it's remembered sometimes more than positive stuff that's said during the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe not the best thing, but it's, you know, like fake it till you make it sort of thing. Mm-hmm. You know, and I suppose that the last thing on that is, which again we've mentioned about letting people play it. I mean, it's one thing to not have it, but the worst thing for me, actually, I think arguably the worst thing is when people try to control the situation way too much. So the game's actually there, it's actually playable, and you're like, oh, can I have a go? Oh, no, we'll show you how it plays. I'm like, well, it's one thing to say, well, we haven't got a playable build yet, here's a video. I'm like, that's cool, but to actually have it there and not let me have a go of it, that instantly, it's a bit like you know, dictatorship propaganda, I suppose, a little bit. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't mean that I suppose what I'm trying to say by that is sometimes you think you're giving the right message, but you're actually giving a completely wrong message, because all I'm saying is, why won't you let me play it? What's wrong with it?
Right.
You know, so I think just let people, if they want to have a go on it, of course, not everyone feels the need to play on it. But if someone says, can I have a go on it? Let them have a go on it. You know, if you've explained it's an early build, it doesn't matter if it goes wrong. Yeah.
I mean, I still, you know, going back to Jupiter and also Sophia, you know, with if you don't have the right answer, then just fake it till you make it. I'm, you know, I don't think there is anything wrong with just admitting that you haven't, you know, figured it out completely at that point. It's like,
I agree.
It also means that you're open to feedback, you know. It's like, oh, okay, we're still looking into that, but happy that you mentioned it, and now I can work on it.
Yeah, and an easy way that they can do that is just to say, actually, I would love your opinion about that, right? And ask the publisher what they think. That's a really, you know, easy hack. One thing I wanted to add on top of what you guys mentioned, I mean, I think publishers always like seeing confidence in developers. But I think I would say there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance and overconfidence. One of my biggest pet peeves is when you're talking to a developer and the game looks pretty good and you know they're pretty far along, and then you ask them, you know, how is this? How do you plan on monetizing the game? And they said, oh, you know, it's premium, but you know we could always change it to free to play, or vice versa, and that just is one of those things that drives me really crazy because it's an oversimplification of how game development works, and I think it kind of tells me as a publisher that, okay, you haven't really thought about this, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that I'm filing away when I'm scoring your pitch that, okay, maybe not the most business savvy or hasn't considered the monetization aspect of the game. So yeah, try not to do that, I would say.
Okay, so the key thing I think we were all sort of getting at is be prepared, you know, for every eventuality. And you know, if you get stuck with a question you don't know, wing it, and it'll probably be okay. Is that sort of the feeling?
I think it's more a case of, no, it's like you say, we obviously had two different opinions there, but it ultimately, I think there is one underlying thing, whether it's you sort of just say, oh yeah, and then you go and look at it and do it, or whether you say, oh, we haven't thought about that, what are your opinions? I think the ultimate point on that is be receptive. You know, you're listening, and you know whether you're going to go and search out external advice, whether you're going to get that internally and consider it yourself, or whether you're just going to ask directly. It's just being open to the feedback and to listening.
That I completely agree with.
But with all this preparedness, I just wanted to like raise the question: like, is it better to have a script and to know exactly what you're going to say at exactly this point and hit all these points and then open for questions, or is it better to just sort of go in and be conversational about it and be a bit more loose with how you're presenting your game?
I think that completely depends on the presenter and what type of person, what their style is. I think, you know, different approaches work for different people. There's some people that are really, really not great at improvising and handling questions and being able to roll with the punches. And in that type of situation, I would recommend for you to rehearse the pitch. And if you can get it out in 1 minute in a way that's very clear and shows me that you put time to, you know, into this rehearsal, that makes a huge difference. But there's some other people that are totally fine with winging it. They have the key bullet points that they want to get across, and the rest of it is just, you know, utilizing their own personality and that kind of thing. That's also okay. I think if you're not sure and you're an indie developer, I would recommend trying both with friends and family or other people in the studio or even a publisher if you guys are already friendly. But there's no right or wrong answer here. It really depends on who's actually delivering the pitch themselves.
Yeah, I think what you say about bullet points is like critical, not necessarily having them in front of you, but like even if you are the kind of person that just goes with the flow like that I do, that's the kind of way I approach a lot of presenting things. Even though I do that, I will prepare, like, here are my key notes that I want to hit, and I need to hit these areas. So, you know, I will prepare in my own way. I prepare for like a talk or a speech or a panel or something by knowing, you know, researching what I'm going to be talking about and knowing different key points, but I don't necessarily feel the need to have a script. Although, like you say, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with having a script. The only thing I'd add is I think you have to be flexible to the idea of the questions might not come at the end. They might come at the different break points. It's a bit like you're reading a book and you've got different chapters. People might have questions after chapter 2. They might not want to save them until the very end.
Yeah, but it's really important to have key points, you know, like stuff that you know you really, really need to say. But if there's like a pitch that you learn from you know, start to the end, and then someone's asking a question in between, and that kind of, you know, you get lost if you have to answer something in between and then you don't know where to start from again, that, you know, that's not necessarily the best decision. I think if you know your game and you know what you need to say, then you'll figure it out. But it doesn't hurt to have a script, you know, that you could dive into at any given time, as long as it doesn't mean that you're not going to take any questions until you're done. because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Cool. Another thing about preparedness that I'm kind of interested in is, we were saying about impromptu meetings and that kind of thing, and having an opportunity to pitch that you didn't originally think was going to come. Should you take every available opportunity to do a pitch, or are there times where maybe you should just hold back, like build a casual relationship with somebody before you then start saying, oh, actually, I have this game, I'm going to start pitching it to you now? Or should you just take every opportunity to go, oh, hi, you're someone from this publisher. I have a game. I think you'd love to hear about it. Like, or is there a fine balance? And I've answered my own question. Please discuss.
I don't think you need to pitch your game right away to a publisher if it's not ready by any means. But it doesn't hurt to get a contact, and just have a normal conversation, depending on the situation, right? If you're at a conference and you're just running into someone that is a publisher, then it's good to have a nice conversation. If you're scheduling a meeting at an online conference right now and you don't have anything to talk about, then it doesn't really make any sense, right? Yeah, but I think you should wait for the moment that you actually know what you want to ask for and not just go ahead.
So a lot of people say to make opportunities, but there's appropriate times to make opportunities. And some people get very excited about their game and very excited about seeing published.
Oh, Jupiter, I think you've gone audio-wise. Oh, have I frozen?
Yeah, I can't hear her either.
Oh.
Unfortunately.
Sorry, Jupiter.
While Jupiter returns, we'll wait until Jupiter returns, but I mean, because I think Jupiter was making a really great point, and
it should be back now.
There you go.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
My mic disconnected. It decided to use a mic that's not plugged in.
Oh, exciting.
That's my default.
Nice.
I don't know what I set up to though.
Just start
really
again.
Early on, yeah.
Yeah, it was really early on.
Sorry. There are appropriate times to pitch to publishers. I think if you're at an event and you see someone and they're talking to someone, or they're doing something, or they're engaged in some way, but even if it's casual, coming up and being like, hello, I know you're a publisher for this game or for these games, and I'd really like to show you my game, might not be the most appropriate time. So in that case, it's probably better to just introduce yourself and get a business card and mention that you have a game that you might want to talk about. So it's a lot about reading what's going on in the situation and not being the type of person that comes over in a time when it might not be appropriate and inserts yourself, because that's a very bad first impression.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's what I was going to say when the mic dropped out. It's just about reading the room. It's, because you could be sitting there, and I think it's always valuable to start up a conversation. Like you say, you can get the business card and something, and if over the course of that conversation, they say, well, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm an indie developer. And if they follow up with something along the lines of, oh, that's interesting, what are you working on? There's your opportunity. But if you can tell that they're, for example, moments away from having a meeting, or busy, about to go on the phone, or even just trying to take a break. Sometimes people are just trying to have a break at busy conferences. Then, just as simple as, oh, if you got a business card, that's what we're all there for. And, a lot of the time, meetings at conferences, and again, I was only talking about this with an indie developer earlier in the week, it might not be until the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th time you've met them that something comes of it. I say met them, spoken with them, chatted with them, anything like that, that something comes of it. I think it's probably rarer that things come right off the bat from a first meeting all the time. So, just saying, hey, it's really nice to meet you. Have you got a business card? Having an opening chat and just showing your face could be the start of something later down the line.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I was trying to say. Like making a first contact and not necessarily pitching right away just to have done it. But it's, we're all people, and it's happy to chat just once in a while.
I'm just going to take a question from the audience. I have another question, and now the chat is going a bit weird for me. So just before we move on to sort of the final closing ideas, Ian Hutchinson asks, and I hope I'm getting this question right because I'm a bit confused on the wording, but how much time would you recommend spending tailoring your pitch for each audience? Should you have one pitch for everybody, or should you focus on having a lot of different pitches for depending on who you're pitching to?
I mean, from my point of view, I think it's you should always do a a little bit of tailoring, but I think the idea of making an individual pitch for every single person is complete overkill and is actually taking way too much time out of what you're normally doing. You should have core elements of a pitch that you utilize all the time, because ultimately they're just your game. And then you have different elements. For example, if you're talking to, you know, a journalist, you might not be drumming down into literally the fine lines of the monetization if it's a consumer journalist, whereas with the publisher, that might be what you want to do. So, you know, tweaking it, definitely, but having like bespoke individual pitches, like here's my pitching deck for a publisher, here's my pitching deck for a journalist. I think if you've got the time to do that, then awesome. But, you know, as we said right at the top, indies are wearing so many hats, and, you know, to me, that would feel like a lot of work for a studio, let alone for one person on their own.
Also, those pitches will probably have a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
Mm.
Cool. Everyone seems agreed on that. Yeah. So another question that I was going to ask, and I'll include somebody else's question in this. What's the best way to maintain contact and follow up with the people that you meet as part of pitching and attending conferences and that kind of thing? And Darn Creek in the chat is asking, what's important when you follow up on a pitch?
It's important to follow up.
Yeah.
And not just leave it there.
But I guess
important
the question is
answer
like, what method is the best way to do it, and what should you be including when you are getting in touch with them? Sorry, Jupiter.
So most of the time people follow up via email because that's what's given out. If they put out a different way they prefer you to contact, probably that way. It's important to answer any questions that were unanswered during the pitch. That's something to always keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it always helps to have some personal touch that shows you were paying attention, and not just copy pasting the same message to everyone, although that's certainly the most efficient way to do it. I would definitely say follow up, but don't be annoying. You know, if you're not hearing back from a developer, you don't need to spam them every single day to get a follow up. But I'm pretty confident that if they really like the game, they will get back to you. Otherwise, you know, I would say focus your energies in other areas or with other people that may have shown more interest to you.
Yeah, I would add that, you know, sometimes it might be necessary to just have a little reminder about who you are, and that's not to be condescending or anything. People meet so many different developers that you might say, I was the person with the game that was about tanks, or, you know, whatever your game was. I think sometimes that can really help. Or, you know, if you, oh, do you remember we met for coffee, such and such? I just a little line like that, and it makes it's not just jogs my mind, but it also, like you say, gives that personal touch. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that meeting. That was really nice. I think the other thing is, there was two other things I was going to say, which is again reiterating what Stephen said, is sometimes it's having a bit of patience. You know, people are busy, and especially with emails that only get checked, you know, maybe a couple of times a day. You know, having that patience and waiting for the reply is really important. And also, if you know that someone who runs the circuits, as we sometimes say in the industry, and is at a lot of events, maybe just find out what events they're going to in the future and say, do you want to grab a coffee? You know, are you heading to, you know, I don't know, I might as well do a plug. Yeah, you're going to Pocket Gamer Connects. Do you want to grab a coffee? You're going to be there. The amount of developers who I know who do that, and actually, it's just really nice. It just helps me get to know people better, and then that feeds into our growing relationship.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it's also, you know, when you go to so many conferences, I would never expect anyone to remember me just from one conversation, never. So when I'm writing emails to anyone, I'm always just, you know, putting in one sentence that says like, oh, it was nice to meet you at this conference there and there, blah, blah, blah. And maybe just one sentence about, you know, that what we talked about. That really, really helps. And it's, yeah, and what the other side, you know, it's like being a tiny, tiny bit patient, because if you have to do so many follow-ups, it can take some time, but it doesn't mean that people forget about you in the meantime.
Great. Awesome. And I'm just going to go for one last question, because I know we're sort of reaching the time here. I just wanted to know, we've talked a lot about like things that you shouldn't do, pitches that you remember because they perhaps weren't very good. I just want to know, are there any sort of memorable pitches that you can talk about where it was actually really good and you sat there and thought, wow, this is something that I really like, and what made it memorable for you when you saw that pitch?
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a story from my very first games event, which is 10 years ago. We talked about rehearsing pitches, and the most effective pitch at this conference, which was in the Ukraine, was actually not in English. So the developer was not able to communicate in English except for, a few words like, city building, that kind of thing, free to play, that kind of thing. But regardless, I think the pitch was clear because energy, kind of like if you go to a concert or whatever, energy is contagious. They were very, very enthusiastic about the game. And within a matter of 1 to 2 minutes was able to show us at the table what was so cool about the game, what was good looking about it, what was unique about it, without being able to string together a complete sentence in English. And we actually ended up leaving that conference and signing that game, and we made a lot of money with it. So I guess the lesson there would be, it's great if you're like a super polished pitcher, but you don't even need to be great at that. It's all about the communication in all the other forms, I guess you could say, the nonverbal, the passion, all the things we talked about, being prepared to show the game and in a clear way. Yeah, I'll never forget that one, because not only because it was my first event, but because it actually worked. Yeah, that's, I would say, something to remember.
So this is sort of a story about a fun pitch, I guess. It was like interesting because it was at a big indie pitch and we were doing like lots of pitches that day. It was hours of people pitching and you get a bit tired, and a lot of pitches can be the same. And this one guy gave us his game to play, and then while doing his spiel was creating like a handmade print that had to do with his game. So he was painting the stamp and stamping down on paper as he like systematically talked through his pitch, which is clearly something he had rehearsed in time with making this thing that we all went home with, and I still have mine in my desk. And it was just interesting to look up from the game occasionally to look at him, because obviously he's giving a pitch and he's just very calmly creating this thing that he handed to us at the end. It was so different, and bringing something different to your pitch and bringing something different to the table can really make you stand out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was going to say, which is actually very similar to Stephen, so I will give another example, but it was, sometimes language isn't as important as you think, and that passion is contagious. And one of our winners in Korea at G-Star the first time we did it, which also, because it was the first time we did it, it was so nice to see such support for the competition. And he didn't speak any any English. Obviously he spoke Korean. He didn't speak any English, but his game just resonated on a level of enjoyment, and he had that passion, and he only knew a few words, and it was just so humbling to see someone so surprised by how well received his game was being. I mean, it was well thought out. It was just, yeah, he was very humble about it. It is an excellent game and very deserving to win, but he was so humble that he was filming the winners, and then when we announced his name, he dropped his phone in surprise because he was so shocked that he was the winner, and he was filming this for everyone else to have a keepsake of the moment. And that was lovely. And the game was very deserving. I suppose something else though is we've seen a number of very unexpected pitches that have done things that have rarely been seen, and even if they have been seen, they've just been taken in such a new and fun twist. Things like Hidden Folks and What the Golf, and or even ones that make you feel something, which is always very important, just like the Almost Gone. And we get a lot of those kind of experiences that make you feel something, and that always stays with me, whether it's upset and sorrow for a well-told story, or whether it's comedy from craziness and wackiness. They're always memorable.
Yeah, for me it's like I don't, did we run out of time, or do I still have like one
No, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so for me it's like you get so many pitches and so many people are trying to sell their game. And when you have someone that is so convinced about their idea and they're really confident in that's what they're doing is actually the right thing, and you have a conversation. And I had a call with someone that has an awesome game, and we were talking about funding him, but at the end it just turned out in a conversation about advising him how he really doesn't need anyone to make that happen for himself. And that's pretty cool if you talk to people that know what they're doing and they just need a tiny push in the right direction to figure out they're good to go. And sometimes that's worth so much more than just giving someone money and support them in that way, and just building up their confidence and being like, yeah, you got this.
Cool. Personally, my most memorable pitch, I think, was for Golf Peaks, the big indie pitch in Poznan. I can't remember what year it was, and the pitch was essentially just the developer played one match of it, was like, this is the controls, and then gave me the phone and said, here you go, and I just sat there and played for like the next 4 minutes and was like, this game is amazing. Didn't have to explain anything about it. I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to keep playing, and when I stopped playing I was so sad that I just wanted to keep going. So yeah, if you've got a great game, that always helps.
I feel like there's a whole article in that, like from someone like me, like the best of the pitch, because I feel bad that I can't name like roll after positive pitches, because there really has been so many amazing pitches that I've personally seen. So
Absolutely.
And what a lovely sentiment to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to everybody on the panel, Jupiter, Stephen, Becca, and Sophia. Thank you for your time. Sorry, Dan, I didn't get around to your last question, but thank you to everybody who asked questions and for joining us in the panel. We will hopefully be doing another one of these next week, or possibly in 2 weeks' time. It's all a bit at the moment, but we're not entirely sure what that will be, but there will definitely be more roundtables in the future. If you check PocketGamer.biz, you will find out more information in the coming days. And of course, don't forget that Pocket Gamer Connects Digital #2 is coming June 8th, 12th. I'm sure I got that right this time. I've always got it wrong on my own podcast. But that is going to be great. We're doing vast improvements to our meeting systems, and we're going to have all the same great content that we've had at all our conferences before, and it's going to be fantastic. Please do check that out. And I think that is it. So I think all that's left to me is to say thank you very much again to everybody who joined us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. We all just slowly leave now. This
Yep,
is
I think
weird.
that's the plan.
Oh, bye.